Thank you for your time. If for the purpose of this recording, you could just introduce yourself.
So hi, I'm Maudo Jallow. I'm a Gambian living in Ghana, working, in the international development space. I'm currently an associate for the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change in Ghana, and we essentially provide advisory services to the government. And yeah, I mean, I grew up in Ghana for a bit, lived in the UK for a while, did a bit of school and undergrad, masters, all in the UK. And I moved back to Ghana just over a year ago. So yeah, that's me.
You haven't been on the ground for too long?
No, I haven't, no.
But professionally, I guess transitioning from a student, so recent grad, to now a young professional in a totally different country, granted that you did grow up in Ghana, how has that been for you?
I mean, I'm always quick to say that, it's different for me because, like you said, I grew up in Ghana and I have a bunch of friends here from when I used to be in school here. I was in Ghana for 8 years, so between 2000 and 2008, I went to school in Ghana. So I'm not the typical sort of diaspora person returning. I would view myself more actually as someone who's from Africa, but then studied in the UK. So it's slightly different, but I think there was an adjustment because I came in from New York. So I actually lived in New York between 2017 and 2018 and 2019, right?
Oh, wow.
And so I moved to Ghana from New York. So it was obviously a bit of an adjustment. Everything's a bit slower, things work a bit more slowly. But in terms of quality of life, in terms of just feeling happier, feeling more fulfilled, feeling like I'm around people who energize me and make me feel ready to work and do great things. Ghana has definitely been great for me, and I've really enjoyed every minute of the last, 15 months or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
I am quite jealous that you're steady life. What granted things are a little bit slower on the continent, but the fact that you're glowing, that's something to be said about the continent. That's amazing. That's amazing. So I guess with regards to your career thus far, if you could kind of just give us an insight into, I guess, how you got to where it is that you are now professionally, especially with such a quite prestigious role, and quite key and pivotal given the current climate as well.
I always talk about the fact that I thank God for my privilege. I grew up, with a household where, I never really sort of wanted for anything, and that included my education. Everything was paid for. I don't have student loans. There's no situation where I sort of owe any university or anything like that. So I'm grateful for that. So, just put that caveat in because I don't want it to sound like this is all from my amazing brain and my hard work or whatever. It's not. I've been very lucky, But beyond that, like I said, I grew up in Ghana for a bit, went to Ghana International School. I left in 2008, went over to the UK. I did boarding school at King Edward School, Whitley, which is about an hour from London to the south. Then I sort of did uni in London at Regent's University, for those of you who know. And then afterwards, I went off and did my master's at LSE for a year, doing development economics, but particularly focused on African development economics, right? Which was fascinating. Unfortunately, the course has been discontinued.
Oh.
But it's a long story, but it was great at the time and I really enjoyed it. So afterwards, I'm never shy to tell the story because it's real and I think a lot of people resonate with this. I finished uni, graduated from LSE. I thought, okay, great. This is me. I made it. I'm gonna get a great job. Applied for jobs for ages. No one would take me, right? So then I was like, okay. I was lucky enough again for my professor at the time. Used to be the director of this office in Geneva, UN office in Geneva. So he recommended me for an internship role, right? And again, you know, always remember your privilege with these situations. I was lucky enough to have a father that was willing to pay for me to go out to Geneva and also pay for my expenses while I was out there. So that was great as well, because I got some great experience for about 4 months living in Geneva, working at the UN. And yeah, so after that, even with that, I left there and there were no jobs, right? So for 5 months, I moved back to Gambia, which is where I'm from, moved in with my mom. For 5 months, I was just doing nothing, waking up. There were days where I'd wake up, stare at the ceiling, play music, and just, you know, think, wow, like my life is literally a mess, right?
I can imagine.
So I kept applying to different places, both in Gambia and outside. And, you know, I got a call from a friend of mine who was like, hey, someone's leaving this UN role in New York. It's great. I think you'd be perfect because you love industrialization. And I was like, okay, great. So what do I do? She was like, you need to send your CV. You need to do a couple of tests, a couple of interviews, and hopefully you'll get it. And that's what I did. And, you know, as they say, rest is history, got the job, moved out to New York. And I've been speaking for a bit, so I'll just summarize the rest of it. Got the job, was there for about a year, didn't think it was for me, really wanted to move back. And then again, this job came up in Ghana to work as an analyst here. So I jumped on it, obviously, and it was great. But these jobs are very few and far between. You know, these sort of international jobs for entry-level staff or near entry-level staff it's very rare. So again, really lucky to have that. And there was a contact of mine who recommended me for that role as well. And so that's how I ended up back in Ghana. So that's basically the sort of boomerang that is my life.
Almost like a full circle moment, I guess, kind of starting and now going back to starting adult life in your professional career in Ghana. That's amazing. You did mention that you were interested in industrialization. So for those of us that are not very well versed in the topic, could you kind of give us a quick overview and what actually sparked your interest in industrialization?
Sure. So I'll start with what it actually is. So I would summarize it as, you know, when we talk about sort of the UK, the US, and Germany and places like that, we talk about them being industrialized economies, right? Basically, all that means is they've gone through the process of just moving from sort of low productivity, you know, and these terms are argued all the time, but just for the benefit of this conversation, low productivity, economic activity, like, you know, sort of rural agriculture and not very mechanized agriculture, to more sort of advanced economic activity with higher productivity, like tech, you know, like manufacturing and advanced manufacturing and, you know, producing cars and computers and things like that. Whereas for many African countries and other developing countries, they're still stuck in sort of agriculture being 60%, 70% of their economic activity. And oftentimes it's not mechanized agriculture. It's just, you know, people with hoes and you know, rakes and things like that working on the field. So that's basically what it's referring to. So when I realized that this is basically the backbone of moving to being a more advanced economy, to me, I think it's underreported, the process of industrialization. And to me, it was just, okay, so I feel like this may not be the complete answer to helping African countries develop, but it's a big part of it. And that's what sparked my interest. And again, I was lucky enough to learn from a great mind on industrialization while I was at LSE. And that sort of just piqued my interest in it. And, you know, since then I've been obsessed with it, to be honest.
I can imagine. So I guess in the age in which we live in now, you know, kind of taking into account globalization as well as the technological advancements that have literally been sort of incredible over the last decade, how do you see that kind of tying in to pushing the industrialization conversation forward on the continent?
I think tech, so it's one of those weird things where tech is both sort of people overestimate what tech can do. It's both overrated and underrated, right? And I'll explain what I mean, right? So it depends on who you talk to. So the Google guys, the blockchain guys, you know who I'm talking, you know, the guys who literally think every problem in the world is going to be solved by blockchain or things like that. Not that these technologies aren't fantastic, or AI, and not that they're not fantastic, and then not that they're not going to change the world in the next 10, 20 years. But there are fundamental issues that mean that it's going to be very difficult to implement blockchain, or cryptocurrency, or AI in African countries, because when these technologies are seen as part of the fourth industrial revolution, I would argue many African countries haven't even gone through the second industrial revolution, right? So there's a disconnect. So that's how I think it's overrated. The way in which it's underrated is there are a lot of older statesmen, particularly in Africa, who aren't leveraging technology enough, right? So they're really not, I mean, simple things like Zoom calls, like we're doing now, right? Are not really frowned upon, but people aren't using it enough. So you'll still have people, taking up their whole day to fly out to somewhere or drive somewhere, just to see how a project is moving, or to speak to someone or have a meeting, when your day could be a lot more productive if you just had 4 Zoom calls instead of having one, 5-hour drive to the north of the country, for example, right? So that's a very sort of, anecdotal example. I'll give you a broader example, right? I see a lot of companies in Ghana. I've been here, and I've been privileged enough to travel the continent as well. I've been to Kenya, I've been to Nigeria, Gambia. And one of the things I've noticed is there are a lot of young people who are, I want to start a tech company or whatever. But a lot of the older people who have a lot of money and are able to invest in tech solutions and tech businesses aren't doing it enough. They're still stuck with the old way of doing things, which is, I'm going to buy, a bit of land, I'm going to build apartments, and people are going to rent those apartments, and then we're going to be rich, right? Which, again, that's not bad. I'm not saying that it's not a bad business plan. I might do that myself one day. But I think if you're going to spend 50% of your disposable income or your investable income in that, I would argue that maybe spend 25%, on investing in providing seed capital or startup capital to a young tech entrepreneur that you believe in, for example, right? Because you never know, it could turn into the next mobile money or some, so that's what I would say. So in a way, it's both underrated and overrated at the same time.
No, definitely. I think even from the outside looking in, so given my current background, I work within the insurance sector, and obviously technology is kind of viewed in 2 ways. I guess for the young professional, we see technology as an enabler to business processes and enhancing operations. But then I guess the more senior generation may not actually view it in that way, rather seeing it, I guess, quite negatively in some instances. However, given the future of Africa and the current climate, given that several countries do rely quite heavily on agriculture at the moment as well, we are currently looking at how technology can be used to push forward the whole agri-tech space, and obviously given insurance as well, that's required. So it's quite interesting to hear from your perspective, both sides. So kind of just turning the conversation now a little bit to the youth, right? So Africa has such a young population on the continent, across the globe, across the West, in Asia. There are so many young people that are rising and doing such amazing things. Let's talk about diaspora youth engagement. What are your current thoughts on it, the issues that you may have with it? And for me, one thing I will get out there and say right now is I do think that at times a lot of us do have the quote unquote white savior complex, thinking that we can come in, do several things, change everything, and hey, Ghana, Nigeria, Gambia, South Africa is going to be the next UK. How about if you just the better Ghana or the next best Nigeria, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree with the premise of your question. I think I'll break your question down into 2. So one is, where do I see things at the moment? And 2 is, sort of commenting on the whole sort of, savior mentality that people in diaspora sometimes have. So tackling the first one, I think I have a great friend who I have known and I sort of spend a lot of time with in Ghana, called Jake Bediako. I think some of your audience might know him, and he's sort of the youth ambassador for diaspora affairs at the Office of the President in Ghana, right? So because of that, because of our relationship, I've actually had a window into what specifically that looks like in relation to your question. And I think there's definitely an increased focus on it from African governments. I mean, his role in itself shows you that, there's an increased focus on it. And, the president here has been, and these are my own sort of thoughts and comments, of course, but the president here has been very focused on supporting that role and seeing it grow and then empowering that role, right? And that, is anecdotal, but again, it's a clear sign. Across the continent as well, we're seeing a lot of, people that are on the individual level connecting with, both from the continent, connecting with people outside the continent, vice versa, and creating initiatives and opportunities and things like that for people to grow and learn and scale things and businesses and charities and so on. Now, one thing that really excites me is the AU, the African Union, is working on a policy for diaspora engagement, which will include how young people can relate to one another from, the diaspora. And one thing that I always try to get people to understand about diaspora engagement is, yeah, we can talk about culture and we can talk about all these great things and the history we share and heritage and things like that. Absolutely, very important. But I want us to graduate as young people from that. And to me, I mean, I view it as a graduation. People can argue that, but I view it as a graduation from just looking at it as a cultural exchange, right, and a great sort of exchange of ideas, to how do we build businesses together, right? And how do we economically empower one another, right? Because there are a lot of young people on the continent, like myself, who are in positions where we can empower people from the diaspora. And the people in the diaspora are also, so there's also talks about your savior mentality point, right? So it's not just a one-way thing. I mean, there are a lot of us on the continent who have a lot to offer to people in the diaspora, right? Right. So then that's one graduation. So taking it to a whole nother level would be then, how do we not only build businesses, but build systems and build opportunities to grow and develop our countries, right? And our continent. And that's sort of the end goal. That's the, what do you want to call it? The omega of all of this, right? It's how do we really get together and build our nations? So that's the first bit. The second bit about the savior mentality, I completely agree. I think, a lot of people in diaspora always talk about white savior mentality, but it's worth comparing, the white savior mentality starter pack, if you will, to the way in which people in diaspora sometimes behave when they come home, right? Because there's almost sometimes a sense of entitlement that, like, I'm home, someone give me something to do, right? But actually, and it's going to sound rude, but it's the truth. I mean, no one asked you to come home, right? So at this point, it's like, what can you do to help? You came to help us. We didn't ask you to come to help us. You came to help us. So what can you do to help people that are already on the ground and doing good work, both in the diaspora, but also if you choose to come home? So that's number one. It's that whole idea of, like, the Kennedy quote about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, kind of thing. Yeah, right. So that's the idea that I would really push, and also being very careful about choosing when to come home and how to come home, right? So I came back to Ghana because I got a job, and it was an expat job that paid me fairly well compared to people that live here, and have jobs at my age, at my level, right? So it was a fairly easy transition. And also I had, like I said, I kept in touch with a bunch of people here. I still remember my way around. It was a very easy transition. So be sure to, make the necessary adjustments and beforehand, and also do your due diligence. Find out if you can actually live, visit, travel, like fly out to Ghana. Don't just come for Christmas and think that's what Ghana is about, right? Come for 6 months or 3 months or whatever, or if you can't take that much time off work, come for a month, but don't come and go to the cafes and things like that. Just do regular stuff, take a taxi, go to cafes and try and work there, see how you feel, interact with people. And then get a good picture of what it feels like to be back. Because the worst thing is someone who comes back with all the good intentions and then gets frustrated by the system and the problems and things like that. And then, I mean, you gave up your job, you moved back, you told everybody you're moving back. Now you're like, I can't be like, okay, I'm moving back now because it didn't work out. So let's be very frank with ourselves is what I would say. And try and take away that whole savior mentality and just humble yourself and come as a servant of the people that you love and you care about, which is why you came in the first place, So that's what I would say to that.
Definitely. I think the key takeaway point from what you said is actually collaboration. The fact that we need to kind of go or move further past, I guess, standard conversation and dialogue that you may have in the airport or when you meet people in cafes and bars, etc. So actually taking tangible steps to making things happen with both parties, essentially, because we are all essentially arguably stakeholders within the continent. We have vested interests in our countries. Now, with regards to collaboration, for somebody that may be watching that is interested in, say, moving to a country in Africa, it's quite easy, to go on social media and connect with people, but collaboration in practice, what does that look like to you, I guess, effective collaboration?
That's a good question. I think, like I said, there are a lot of people who are doing a lot of collaborative work. There are a lot of people who are doing a lot of sort of engagement online and doing webinars and things like that, especially in this time of COVID-19.
Right.
I think the way in which you take that forward is structure and organization. I'm a big believer in structure and trying to shift structure and build systems and change culture and things like that, because I'm much more about the long-term play, right? I don't particularly, I attend a lot of conferences, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy them, but conferences and webinars and things like that often have very little follow through. There's follow up. Sorry. I guess you could say follow through because people do it, but they don't actually follow through with anything.
Exactly.
And so I mean, the best you could hope for is like you have a conference and then there's like a list of recommendations that come out of the conference, but nothing really gets done. So I would say maybe direct some of our energy to building organizations, building groups. Whether it's economic groups or political groups or whatever it is, social groups. I mean, I have a friend of mine who's a part of this great group where Nigerian women from both Nigeria and the diaspora have like a weekly call where they just get on the phone and just share experiences, both from Nigeria and also outside of Nigeria, right? And it's always packed. It has dozens and dozens of people, women, sorry, and they come from the standpoint of we just want to learn from one another, right? That's the starting point, right? But then think about how powerful it would be if that group then took that and said, okay, we're going to turn this into an economic group, right? So we're going to have a saving system, right? Where we're going to have one bank account or one fund or whatever it is, and people are going to put, whatever you want to put in there, whether it's let's say 5% of your salary or 2% of your salary, whatever it is, into this fund. And then every month or every 2 months or every 3 months or whatever, you put that money together and then you build a project, or you build out a project and you build maybe a school, or you fund something, or you give money to entrepreneurs who are trying to do something. That's, I think, a tangible way in which you can start to take that engagement to the next level, right? So just to show you that this is something that I'm actually doing and not just saying do as I say and not as I do kind of thing.
Sure.
I have an NGO that I founded called New Nation in Gambia, where we don't do exactly that, but what we do is it's a combination of, I think it's an even split between between people like myself who are outside the country and people who are in the country, right?
Wow.
And it's a group of about 7 people, excuse me, who are sort of, young professionals working in the field, and they just want to help, sort of thing, right? So they've come up with ways in which we can help. So through education and other avenues. And it's basically this understanding that like, you're outside, I'm here. So you can so the people outside like myself do a lot of the strategy work, the PR work, what else? The social media work. And then the people on the ground, implement projects. So at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, we went on like this fundraising drive where we got money together and we donated it to rural families in Gambia who were suffering from, the pandemic. And we basically just bought basics, rice, oil, things like that, and delivered it to people in villages, right, in Gambia. That's a great example of how, so we're in the diaspora, well, I'm in the Gambian diaspora, right? Yeah. And I'm collaborating with people that are on the ground who were all around the same age. We're all about sort of 24 to 30 sort of age range. Sure. And we're just, we get on calls together, we strategize, we plan, and we get things done. Mm-hmm. And I think also people need to be patient in that process and just know that, these things, so New Nation has been running now for almost 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I still don't feel like we're exactly where we want to be, right? Sure. So it's just, again, like I said at the beginning, the long game and just focusing on building something that's sustainable and something that creates structural change.
Sure. Well, I think that that example is actually fantastic of how we could connect within the diaspora anyway, with those that are actually on the ground, i.e. Indigenous Africans, and actually doing things that actually affect communities and people directly. Because I think sometimes when we think about going back to Africa, we just think about going back to capitals, going back to cities and building up those cities. But hey, if you drive just 10 miles out of that city, life isn't exactly the same. It isn't as glamorous. You don't have your bloom bars and all the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As far as there are people that do need our help. And if we are talking about collaboration, it is for the betterment of the country. It's not for the betterment of this particular industry. It's for the betterment of the country as a whole. And, a lot of our population do work in the informal sector. And these are people that were severely affected by the pandemic, especially in its initial stages. So I think hearing examples like that is encouraging, and hopefully viewers will endeavor to actively do the same. So just to touch on COVID-19. So I think it goes without saying that a lot of African countries did respond quite well to the pandemic, in comparison anyway to those of us in the West. That lockdown has now been eased and people are backing out like no man's business, and the numbers are continually going up. I think it has been an interesting thing to happen. Of course, condolences to people that have lost their lives and people that have lost loved ones, but it's quite interesting to see how Africa has used what is a very, very serious pandemic to actually take active strides into their actual development and their policies. What are your views on that?
I think that's a great sort of way to go into something that I love talking about, which is just what this has done. It's exposed this whole idea that for a lot of people is like a given, right? When people start talking about African development, it's like, oh, governance on the continent is terrible, and all the leaders are rubbish. They don't know what they're doing. All of them need to be. But as we've seen, that's not necessarily the case. Now, the issue is, are there some bad leaders on the continent? Yes. Are there some corrupt leaders on the continent? Yes. But they're not all corrupt and they're not all bad leaders. I mean, using Ghana as an example, I know of it, there are close to 200 countries in this world, right? I know of at least 150 countries that would love to have Ghana's president as their president, right? And this is not speaking as, this is technically someone from the outside looking in, because I'm Gambian. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Ghana, but I'm not partisan in my views. Like I'm just saying it as I see it. I think he's an exemplary leader, and in the time of COVID-19, and I was privileged enough to work, in sort of the presidential coordinator's team. So I saw this for myself. His decision making, his ability to absorb information, large amounts of information, and make decisions based on that was fantastic. Now, that dispels this whole thing about African leaders are terrible. Now, then if the problem isn't necessarily leadership, right? And I'm not saying leadership isn't part of the problem in many places, it is. Then what's the other issue? I think you then start to see that it's other things like capacity. A lot of these governments have great plans, great policies, great ideas, but they don't have people to actually implement. I mean, if you have a great, website idea, but you don't have a website designer or website engineer or whatever to actually put it in place, you're not going to do it, right? So oftentimes, if you were to go into a ministry today in Ghana and read their policies, you'd be amazed at how well thought out they are, right? Yeah. If you go to the Ministry of Planning and you look at the plans that they have for Accra and the way they want to build, trains and sky trains and things like that, and build new roads and stuff like that, they're fantastic and they would be very beneficial. But things lack of funding. There isn't enough funding to do these things. People think African governments are rich. No, African governments, most of them are broke, especially with COVID-19 hitting now. I'm seeing report after report. I just posted yesterday about how, the budget deficit for Ghana is going to balloon, this year, according to the Minister of Finance. And that's the case for many other African countries. I for work, I put together a list of, debt for African countries, recently. And every single country that you can think of is borrowing money right now, and in huge amounts. Ghana borrowed $1 billion recently from the development finance institutions just to be able to deal with the pandemic. This isn't even for the recovery yet. This is just to deal with the pandemic, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it just puts into perspective how competing interests all the time. You want to build a road, but there's this going on. You want to do this, but there's that going on. Yes. And that's really the true issue, I would argue, in places like Ghana, as opposed to leadership. And when you compare it to the shambles that, has been the response in places like the UK and things like that, where they don't, I was shocked to find out that only a few weeks ago was when they implemented a track and trace system in the UK.
Yes.
Right? To find out who has it. I mean, this is basic stuff. When we in Ghana, we implemented this, a week after the first case or a couple of weeks after the first case. So, right. So this is the thing. So I just, for the benefit of the audience, I would just encourage everyone to rethink how they analyze the issues around a lack of development on the continent, because it's not just bad leadership and these leaders need to go. Because you can bring Obama and put him as president of Zimbabwe. It doesn't mean Zimbabwe is going to become a first world country tomorrow. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, there's structural issues that are stopping these countries from getting to where they need to be. And, that's what I always argue. So, that's what I would say to that.
Definitely. I really honestly do admire the response of several African countries during this time. I think just on the mere fact that countries actually closed their borders, you have countries in the West whose borders were opening, and that's cases coming in and out and just increasing the numbers across the globe. So it is interesting and encouraging to hear that you share, I guess, the same sentiment. I think kind of looking at the world post-COVID and Africa post-COVID, especially in light of things like the Continental Free Trade Agreement that is hopefully going to come into place and become effective. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the future, or what Africa will look like post-COVID?
That's a tough question. And it's one of those ones that, like, I could say a bunch of things and not really say anything.
Exactly.
But I'm trying to, frame it in a way that I avoid just saying a bunch of buzzwords and not really say anything. Sure. I think the most important thing for me is for African countries now to understand that this is a seminal moment. Like, this isn't business as usual. This isn't, we're just going to go back to normal. It's not that. This is unprecedented. Mm-hmm. In every sense of the word. It's going to change the way people behave, yes. The way people do business, the way people think about trade and industry and everything else. So one thing I think is, first and foremost, understand that this is a huge moment in human history. That's where you start from, because a lot of people don't realize that. They're just like, after COVID, or, you hear people say after lockdown or after this, we're going to do this. It's not like that. I mean, what's after lockdown? There's no vaccine. So it's just going to go on and on and on until it's safe enough for people to actually go back to the way they used to live their lives, or adjust to a new normal, as people keep saying, that I guess takes that into consideration or something. But it's important to recognize that. Now, the next step after that is, once you recognize that, okay, we're in a crisis, what do? You can either sit there and be like, oh my God, we're in a crisis, everyone help, which you do need to do a certain amount of, because you're an African country, and like I said, you're broke, and there are all these issues. So you do need help from outside. But then how can you leverage that help to set you up for the next 20 years? So I'll give you an example. And I love this example, so maybe if someone else has heard me say this before, I apologize for repeating it, because I just love this example. So I think the cool thing that happened was, a lot of African countries were like, okay, we can't import stuff, borders are closed, right? We can import cargo, but a lot of the cargo is meant for health, equipment and things like that. And also, a lot of countries aren't even exporting things that we need for COVID-19 because they're keeping it for their own people, right? So what do? You need to produce it locally, right? So I'll give you a tangible example. There was a textile and garment manufacturing company, the biggest in Ghana. It's called DTRT Dignity, right?
Yes.
They employ thousands of people right in the middle of Accra in the industrial area. They make garments that are then shipped to the US and used by big brands, right? So they were like, okay, we can't ship to the US. It's not, everything's sort of closed down.
Right.
So, and people need masks. We're going to produce masks. So we literally, I remember sitting in a meeting where, the head of DTRT, and it was in America at the time, called in and was like, hey, we have the capacity to produce, I think he said something at the time, like 10 million masks. Wow. We have enough material. We have the expertise. We can train our people. We just need to get a guarantee from the government that once we produce it, they'll buy it, right? And we're good to go. And eventually it happened. And we have, now the government has this policy of locally producing PPE, masks, all these other things, gloves, face shields, and things like that, both for health workers, but also just for everyday people, right? And for people in the government and things like that to use. I thought that was fantastic. I'll give you another example. In Kenya, right? There was a car manufacturing company in Kenya who started making ventilators, right?
Right.
So it's that idea of like, okay, we're making this now, but because we have the engineers and the expertise and the materials to make cars, we can also make ventilators, right? And then I think there was, even in Ghana, Casapreco, Casapreco, they started making wholesale, they started making hand sanitizers because of the alcohol, right? Yeah. So it's this great space where innovation lives, where it's a bit of necessity, but also just the push and the dynamism and the engagement and the partnership. This is the great point, the partnership between the private and the public, where the government was supporting private entities to do this. I thought that was fantastic. So that's an example of how we can use this moment as an opportunity to create new paradigms that we live in, where it's not about importing, it's about local production, right? And also, while we do that, I just hope that this doesn't derail the CFTA, right? To go back to your question, because already you're hearing a lot of people say, hey, I'm not sure about opening the borders. In Ghana, they're saying all these Togolese came in and brought in, infections. Yes, that might be true, but the point with the free trade area is that it's not like you're not going to have borders at all. You are going to have borders and you're going to have customs. But the point is to allow the free movement of goods and people.
Exactly.
With checks. You're still going to have checks at the border and things like that, but you're going to have a free movement of people in the sense that you don't need visas, you don't need to pay taxes, and be held up at the border and things like that for too long, and just allow that economic activity to grow. Because, in Africa, we only trade with ourselves 16% of the time. I'm sure you've heard this statistic before, and that's crazy, because we're the only continent in the world that sits on one landmass, right? The whole African continent sits on one landmass, right? So we don't have seas or oceans or whatever between us, right? All we need to do is build the infrastructure, the road infrastructure, the air infrastructure, and all these other things to enable this inter-African trade. And it helps. It really does. And it will create new opportunities, and it will create a bigger market, which will help business in Ghana. Instead of saying, oh, I have access to a market of what's Ghana's population? 30 million people, 30 something million people. I can then say, actually, I have access to the whole of Africa, from Ghana as a business person. I mean, the downsides, of course, and whoever wants to discuss that can reach out to me, and I love such debates.
Sure.
But I think the main thing is it's just an opening up of opportunities and opening up of channels to collaborate and things like that. And I think it's a great thing. And so I just hope that the fear and the disruption of supply chain, things like that from the pandemic don't derail the CFTA project, because I think it's a great one.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that sentiment. I'm a massive advocate. Anyone that kind of follows me on social media knows that I'm always talking about, just because of the opportunities that it could bring to the continent. And you rightly mentioned, we are the only continent that operates on one landmass. The opportunities are honestly endless. That may be me just being ridiculously optimistic, but I do think it is an opportunity that one should take. I think kind of touching on everything, or kind of rounding up everything you've kind of said so far, just about collaboration, and in light of COVID, the innovation that has been sort of birthed on the continent. What three things would you say excite you the most about Africa today, and I guess the future of the continent as well?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think what excites me is, so the first one would be just the way in which people's mindsets and mentalities are very slowly, but definitely changing across the continent and around the world about the continent. Even people on the continent are increasingly optimistic. I mean, there are a lot of people who are pessimistic, and I don't blame them. But there are a good number of people who are very optimistic about the prospects of the continent. And I hear more and more now, I'm committed to developing the continent. I'm committed to developing the continent in a way that maybe when I was leaving, so to speak, the continent in 2008, that wasn't really the sentiment back then, if I remember correctly, right? And there's this pride of being African that I'm feeling that a lot of people have nowadays, whether it's because of music, whether it's because of, art and film and all these other things that are fantastic. There's really that optimism. So that's number one. Number two, I think that what I'm really excited about is the fact that if you look at the trends that we've seen, I mean, before COVID, and I hope we get back to that level.
Yes.
For the past, I would say about 20 years, right? African economies have been some of the fastest growing in the world. Year after year after year, you hear the fastest growing economy is Ghana, the fastest growing economy, and this is in the world, by the way. Exactly. The fastest growing economy in the world is Ghana. The fastest growing economy in the world is Ethiopia, right? This year was supposed to be Rwanda, I think, until COVID-19 hit. So that really excites me, because that we've moved past, the turn of the decade, the millennium actually, or the century. We were still sort of very much stuck in civil wars, political unrest, this and that, and now we've seen a maturity of governance on the continent. I mean, there's still issues, look at Burundi, you look at some other places, Mali and things like that, and you think Cameroon, and you think to yourself, man, like this is a mess. But you see a lot of places where democracy is growing and it is becoming very much accepted and a given, right? Where people are like, this is the way we want to be governed. And beyond that, there's stability, right? You don't see civil war every time there are elections. You don't see people just going onto the street and killing themselves, right? So, well, killing each other. So, so for me, it's that, like, comparing the past 20 years to the last, to the 20 years before that, and thinking, man, there's a lot of optimism and there's a lot of economic growth and there's a lot of opportunity, and we're doing, generally as a continent, we're doing well both in terms of governance and in terms of economics, right? So that's the second thing. The third one would be, I'm personally excited about just seeing this become our decade,
Mm.
you know, and seeing this become our century and our millennium,
Yeah.
right? And everyone keeps talking about Africa as the next frontier of growth, and they think about it economically. But I think about it not just economically, but just culturally, right?
Yeah.
The way in which, you know, the renaissance of you know, in Europe and
Mm.
Asia and places like that, where their arts and their music and their culture became just norms, right, around the world, and they were being valued, and African artists and African writers and you know, entertainers were being valued and paid for their brilliant work, you know. That excites me. It's just this Africa maturing and coming into its own and being proud and fulfilled, and also just bringing the young people and the women,
Yes.
you know, making it as inclusive as possible. And I think we are very much a generation that is cognizant of the need to be
Exactly.
inclusive, right? And be sustainable. You know, we're very much advocates of social, you know, social change, but also, you know, environmental change. Just very cognizant of the fact that there's climate change, and if we don't do something, it's going to go very badly very quickly.
Right.
Right? So all of that in a nutshell and in a huge ball, and I know it's very broad, but I wanted it to be something that we can all sort of buy into and be happy about. And I think that's what excites me really, is just that opportunity.
Mm,
Yeah.
definitely. I 110% agree. I think the optimism across both parties, you know, so diasporans across the world, as well as those actually in Africa, is rising. And hopefully, I think that with collaboration, effective collaboration, that we are able to indeed make it our decade, our century, and our millennium, as you have rightly said. So my last question for you would be, because I mean, I could talk about Africa and everything all day, would be what advice would you give to diasporans? So maybe those that are looking to either move back onto the continent, obviously in a world post-COVID, and also those that actually want to move into a professional career as you have in Africa as well.
So moving back is one thing. By the way, for everyone in the diaspora who's looking to move back, there's literally a website called Move Me Back, who
Yeah.
was started by a friend of mine called Charles, and and it's fantastic in terms of just letting you know what the opportunities are, letting you know about conferences that you can attend, where other Africans will be, and that leads me very well into my point, which is anything you want to do, make sure, and this is just general life advice, it's just anything you want to do in any field, make sure you network with people in that field. And that will not only give you an understanding of that field, but also will allow you to know what's going on in that field. So
Yeah.
you're able to slot in where, and you know, where you want to slot in, right? So for me, I'm constantly attending conferences, even when I lived outside of Africa. You know, I would constantly attend conferences on Africa. I would constantly be reading stuff on Africa. I would constantly be, you know, writing stuff and putting it out there as well.
Yeah.
And what you have with that is people, you know, most of my DMs, you know, aren't the usual things that, you know, people find in their DMs, you know,
Right.
it's more like, it's not, hey, do you want to go out for dinner? It's more like, hey, I saw your post. I think this is great. Can we collaborate? Or like, I saw your post. I have this conference coming up. Do you want to speak or do you want to attend? Right. And then once you get into that ecosystem of people who will care about the continent and want to do good, you know, in the continent or on the continent, then it becomes a lot easier because then you already know the opportunities that are out there. And it's just about picking which one you think is good for you, right? So as I said earlier, you know, just making sure that you're fully aware of what you're getting yourself into, right? And you know exactly, you know, what you're doing before you do it, right? As opposed to just, oh, hey, you know, I feel like moving to Ghana and I'm going to do it. It doesn't really work that way, right? So that would be my advice, just being very intentional about that.
Definitely. And on that note, I mean, whilst we could talk for ages, I think I will leave you to have a good evening. So thank you so much for your insight, expertise, and knowledge on all of the stuff that we have spoken about. So for those that are interested in following you, finding out more about what you do, I know you recently launched your website, you're doing some great things. Please do share.
No, so yeah, the website is everything to do with me is literally my name. So MaudoJallow.com is my website. For everything else, Instagram, Twitter, it's at Maudo Jallow. And a lot of what I talked about today is exactly what I post about. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, please give me a follow or check out my website. And thank you, Jennifer, for this. This is really cool. Thank you.